We're speaking with Monroe Carroll, Chairman and CEO of Central Parking Corporation based in Nashville. Thank you for being with us on the Dow Jones Investor Network.
Thank you, Shannon, for having me.
Central Parking owns and manages parking lots both in the U.S. and in Europe. You have about 1,300 facilities. Perhaps if you can give us an overview to begin with of the parking lot industry.
Well, I think the industry is really broken up into two components. The private sector, which we probably represent about 15% of that sector with our location count. And then there's another component, which is a municipal component, which are those facilities that are built and owned and probably operated by the individual cities. And that represents about another, let's say, 10,000 parking spaces. So it's about evenly distributed between the private sector and the public sector as far as facilities are concerned.
And what about in terms of market size? Would you have a dollar figure that you could attach to the overall business?
I don't have that number. The problem in our industry, it's very fragmented. And it's basically a lot of individual owners, particularly in the private sector aspect. And when we were going public, that was one of the statistics that was very difficult to obtain. So I wish I had that number, but I don't.
Perhaps if you can talk about some of the unique dynamics to the parking industry, how it's labor intensive. A lot of it is dictated really just by sports events or shopping.
I think the thing you have to understand about the parking industry is that no one comes to park. They come to the city, or they go to the hospital, or they go to the sporting event for that purpose. And parking is an ancillary service that comes along with it. So our industry is not it depends upon other demands as far as that's concerned. And the key in our industry has been to anticipate what those demands were going to be. And that's evolved over the last 25 years. And fortunately, we've been able to see the trends or to anticipate the trends and to adjust to them. For example, in our business today, the downsizing that's taken place throughout the United States and here in New York City has impacted what we call fringe properties. But the parking facilities that are in and close to the primary generators, such as your building right here, are still doing very, very well. The demand is even, in fact, increasing. But if you were to go a number of blocks away, which was once a very good business because you had a lot of back-of-the-house work, that's been now relocated to the suburbs or into some other form. And so, as one example, we got out of the fringe business about 10 years ago and concentrated in the very heart of the urban area because we felt like that's where the business was going to be in the future. So you have to sort of anticipate what the impact of various cultural changes are going to have on your business.
If you can talk for a minute about some of the markets where you do have a penetration and whether or not the strategy is to build up a national market presence or to go and approach each city on a building up by building up basis.
Well, we do it in both ways. As a matter of fact, our growth strategy is based both on a local basis, which is the local general manager and regional manager who may be responsible for that city or area. And then we also do it on a national basis with national clients like the Rouse Company or the Taubman Company or Equity Office Properties, which is the Zell Corporation, or others like that. And we've always worked a significant segment of the national market as well as the local market. And that's given us an advantage going forward, and particularly as it relates to companies that are in our business that are local to a particular city or to a particular region, because most clients, and particularly with the consolidation that's taken place in the real estate business, most owners today want to deal with fewer contractors or vendors. And so if they have a relationship with Central Parking Corporation in 3 cities and they buy another property, it's much easier for us to negotiate a contract because we have a pre-existing relationship. They know us, we know what they want, and that's worked to our advantage. Now, there are certain cities, Miami, we have a significant market penetration in. Denver, Colorado is another. In Los Angeles, we have probably 15%, but still that's a big penetration as compared to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we might have 85%. So we work both on a local and a national basis. And of course, again, the expansion aspect has taken us to Europe, For example, London is our largest and most successful city with over 100 properties there. And we see the continent performing in the same fashion.
About 14% of your revenues actually come from your London operations. Going forward, do you see international as being a major contributor to revenues?
Well, it will certainly continue to grow. And I've been asked, what's that growth going to be? I'd say it's going to be 25% of our revenues in the next 5 years, something of that sort. We formed a very successful joint venture in Germany just recently, and now we have locations in Berlin, Frankfurt, Dusseldorf, and Dresden. And we see that market, the love affair of the car that we in the United States have is also very true with Europeans and people on the continent, wherever. So service, we think of Europe possibly as being a service. I think of it as the Claridge Hotel, where the service is excellent. But basically, most of the service providers in Europe and in the UK have not really considered the public. And whereas in the US you have to do that. And so taking that service component has been very well accepted.
So who do you view as the competition? Is it perhaps not so much national providers but local competition, or do you even consider mass transit as a competitor?
Well, no, mass transit is a brother and sister, however you want to put it. Where you have good mass transit, we have good cities, and our business is good. So we endorse mass transit. We're very much in favor of it. You might think we would not be, but in fact we are, because that serves a component of a city that is necessary to the city, and so it helps our business. As far as our competitors are concerned, there are several other national companies that we compete against, particularly in certain geographic areas, and there are other strong regional companies that we compete against. But because of the national account basis, it helps to mitigate some of these situations.
Perhaps if you can talk about the different options that you have in terms of ownership, management contracts, leasing, and direct ownership, the most of which you have in place are management contracts. Right. Is this going to stay the same? Are you moving towards leasing or full out
That's one of the
ownership?
changes that's taken place in the 90s. In 1990, about 41% of our revenue came from leased and owned properties. In 1995, 75% of that came from leased and owned. So there's been a significant shift from the management account to the leased and owned property. And the reason that's happened is that prior to 1990, parking was built as a service to the building. It was analogous to elevators. Then in the early 90s, when the construction started and vacancies began to appear, their cash flow from parking facilities became very important. And we saw that coming and began to concentrate our marketing effort on adding value, showing the particular owner how we could increase his gross revenue, or excuse me, not his gross, but his bottom line revenue, by $250,000, $300,000, $400,000. And we would guarantee a portion of that, or we would take our part as a percentage of the improvement. So our business has swung significantly towards leased and owned. Now, as a public company, we're trying to buy more properties. We've always bought properties, but we're concentrating a great deal more in that now as a public company than we have in the past. And we're also concentrating or trying to do more joint ventures with the person who owns the generator, let's say, because we think that's the real money in the long run, in the leased and owned.
But leasing takes more capital infusion, and outright ownership and going out and buying takes a lot of capital. What sort of financing do you have available? I mean, are you going to do a secondary anytime soon, given, I guess it was October that you did your IPO?
We've invested about $15 million in the 9 months of this fiscal year. We'll probably invest another $5 before in this last quarter in offers that we have out. I just spoke to a young man working for us in a particular city, and he had come back. He was back in the corporate office. And we're looking at a large buy. So these have been relatively small. The company generates $20-25 million of cash flow annually, which we put back in. So we hope to do a major acquisition or one or two major buys, which would take us back to the market. But we don't do anything unless it makes money. And so we are particular as to how we use it, but we are concentrating our efforts much more heavily in that area of how to invest the capital
Now,
intelligently.
you talked about acquisitions. Your last major acquisition was in 1992 of Myers, which effectively doubled your size. Can you talk about how the operating margin did suffer somewhat? It went from 13% in 92 down to 8% in 93. Now it's roughly at about 10.8% in 95.
That's a characteristic of our business. In New York City, an average ticket is $20. The average ticket in Dallas is probably 6 or 7. We picked up a lot of gross revenue in New York and also in the UK with Heathrow Airport.
We must say Myers was a northeastern facility-based
Yeah.
company. Just so.
Myers was the northeastern, it was our acquisition. The gross revenues are much higher in the Northeast, Boston, New York, than they are in the rest of the company. So we picked up a lot of top-line revenue. We picked up what we thought was a good profit number, but it wasn't the same percentage. And as I've said before, if you are looking at a location like a Heathrow, where the Heathrow Airport in London, where they have an established $25–30 million top-line cash flow, they're not going to let you make 12%. If you can make 7% or 8%, it's very good money. Now, we wouldn't take those margins if it was not already an established revenue. In the case of Myers, that we had an established revenue stream. In the case of Heathrow. So when those hit our financial statement, they tended to reduce our margin, but our profits went up substantially.
So going forward, do you see an acquisition happening in a different part of the country than the Northeast? Are you looking?
Well, we're looking at them
Okay.
both in the Northeast and outside the Northeast as far as that's concerned. The key thing as far as acquisitions are concerned is that I don't intend to enter into an acquisition that is any way causes dilution of the earnings per share. It's going to be accretive or we're not going to do it. And so it may hit our margins to some degree until we bring it back into balance. But we are a bottom line driven company, and we'll continue to be that way.
If we can talk about earnings, you came out with third quarter earnings on August 2nd, where revenues were $37 million for the quarter, up 16% from a year ago. Earnings per share for the fourth quarter analyst estimates are 19 cents, bringing that to 77 cents for the year. And for year ending 1997, they're looking for 89 cents, which shows a 16% increase over 1996. How do you justify a PE ratio of 40 when your stock's trading at around 29?
Well, the market's been very kind to us, is the fact. We've been able to do a 34% compounded growth over the last 5 years. I think that we'll come in slightly above what the market has anticipated. I don't think that we haven't gone far enough in the budgeting process to estimate what our fiscal 96, 97 numbers will be. But
are you comfortable with earnings estimates that analysts have out there that I cited?
Yeah.
Okay.
We will handle those. We were 60 cents for the 9 months. If we bring in 19 or better, we're going to beat what the analysts have said. And I think the analysts they haven't known us long enough. We feel like that our growth was 22% for the second quarter and the third quarter as far as earnings per share, and that's with about a 14% increased number of shares over the previous year. So it was much better. We're 38% over in earnings of 9 months versus 9 months of the previous year. The market's looking for us to continue to maintain those kind of growth numbers. I'm going to work hard to do it. I certainly can't promise that.
Are there new areas that you're looking to get into? I read where In Jackson, Mississippi, you awarded a trolley contract. Can you talk about developing the transportation services end?
Well, we do anything that parks cars and moves people, and we do a lot of shuttle, what we call shuttle or trolley business, and it has to be site specific. I mean, there has to be a demand and some reason for it. It's not going to be a large component of our business going forward. The big component of our business going forward will be the privatization that's hopefully going to take place both in this country and will continue to expand in the European and UK markets. So we see that privatization being one of the big issues, and the acquisitions.
We talked about how labor intensive the industry is. Is automation and technology going to play a big role going forward?
It's going to some extent, but you have to understand that New York is a high labor intensive market. Basically, this industry is not. Basically, we don't touch the automobile. Here in New York, you see a unique set of circumstances. In New York, it's very labor intensive. In the rest of the United States, and in basically the rest of the world, with the exception of hotel business, it's not that labor intensive. And in fact, we see that component actually being reduced, not in New York, but in the balance of the United States and in Europe, and it's what we call pay on foot. For example, in London at the Heathrow Airport, 85% of our business is transacted where the person uses a machine and uses a credit card. We see that component growing significantly here in the United States, and that reduces the number of cashiers, the number of people that are required. So that's going to be a growing component. We will eventually, in not too distant future, the person will drive in, either take a ticket and go to transact their business, go to the exit and use their credit card, their Visa, their American Express, whatever, and pay in that fashion. The alternative to that will be to use your credit card when you come in, use your credit card when you go out, and there will be no personal involvement. We still need to have people, because one of the sensitive issues in parking is security.
Security, sure.
And seeing people. So we're not going to take the people out of the garages. We're going to probably have to, and we'll want to intensify that aspect. But as far as people handling the cash, that will be reduced as time goes on.
So you need people, and certainly you need them in overtime hours. And one of the measures, I guess, of efficiency is overtime hours as a percentage of total labor hours. So
Right.
you're actually about 1% versus the industry of 5%. Is there any impact from the recent minimum wage increase?
Well, we were way over the minimum wage to begin with.
Okay.
And we operate on the philosophy that if a person's supposed to work 38 hours or 40 hours, you pay him a reasonable wage for those 38 or 40 hours. You don't try to Mickey Mouse it and give him 10 hours of overtime and he works 50 and makes the same as he should make for 40. The minimum wage will impact us some, but not significantly as far as that's concerned. But we do watch overtime. I mean, we think it's an important part of business, is to manage that. You're not going to eliminate it totally, but if you bring it down to where we'll have on a pay period 350 to 400,000 hours, and if we go from 5% to 1%, we've saved a significant amount of money.
So going forward, at what rate would you comfortably grow the company?
Are you talking about bottom line growth?
Bottom line growth.
Well, we are going to be shooting for the 22 to 25% in that area. We are going to try to do better, but that's what we're pushing for. A case in point, we had the mother of all winters in New York City. You experienced it. We got hit hard in the second quarter, not just up in the northeast, the Boston, New York market. That snow extended further. We lost 8 to 10 days in Washington, D.C., which we'd never lost. Went on into Richmond and so on. So it hit us significantly. But we implemented a contingency plan in January, and we told the market we might be as much as 4 cents down for the second quarter, but we'd make it up in the third and the fourth. We've always been a profit-driven company. Our total compensation program is incentive-based. It's always been incentive-based. Our people were used to dealing with unexpected happenings such as these snowstorms and adjusting their operating practices so that we bring the earnings in where we hope to bring them in, and we're certainly going to prove that point this year.
So how do you make those days up? I guess you can't, because it's not as if people are going to go.
Well, you can't make them up, but you really you begin to watch how you're managing your company, and it's not to say that you delay some of the things you might have done. If you have a position that becomes vacant, then you do some extra work for 6 months to make up for that person not being available. But when your employees are heavily incentivized and are heavily involved in options or in the stock purchase plan, they know what it means, and they talk about it, that earnings per share it's their money too, not just the stockholder. So we've got a bunch of very competitive entrepreneurial people. It's been the key to our business for 25 years.
I'd like to thank you for your time, Monroe Carroll, Chairman and CEO of Central Parking Corporation.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is Shannon Turner for the Dow Jones Investor Network in New York.